a man despised since birth, the son of a prostitute, rejected by his own family, cast out from the house where he grew up. His name is Jephthah, and against all odds, he became the leader of an entire nation. But what almost no one knows is that before achieving his greatest victory, Jephthah made a vow to God. A desperate promise born from pain, from faith, and from the fear of defeat. He offered something in exchange for victory, something he never imagined would cost him so dearly. What did he promise? Why did he do it? And what was the price he paid after winning the war? The answer lies in one of the Bible's most tragic and rarely told stories. Get ready to uncover Jephthah's dark secret, a decision that marked generations and that still raises a disturbing question today. Did God accept that sacrifice? Watch until the end, because you are about to discover the untold story of Jephthah and what he offered to God in exchange for victory. Join us as we explore how Jephthah became a symbol of resilience, faith, and leadership, even after being rejected by his own family. The promise he made to God changed everything. In a time marked by shadows and uncertainty, when Israel still staggered between judges and kings, between faith and idolatry, there lived a man whose name would echo through the centuries. Jephthah, the son of shame. His birth was not celebrated, nor was his childhood filled with laughter. On the contrary, Jephthah was born with the mark of scorn etched into his flesh and soul. His father, Gilead, was a man respected among the elders of the tribe, owner of fertile lands, and a skilled warrior in his youth. But in a moment of weakness or loneliness, perhaps both, Gilead had a child with a prostitute. This woman was never brought into his home, never had a name among his people, but she left behind a seed, a strong boy with dark eyes and a weary gaze, who would learn early on the weight of not belonging. While Gilead's legitimate sons, Abner, Shimei, and Dodo, ran freely through the wheat fields, Jephthah grew up on the fringes like an unwanted shadow. His stepmother, Gilead's lawful wife Naamah, tolerated his presence like a pebble in her shoe, annoying but bearable. Gilead never denied him food or shelter, but neither did he give him love. Yes, he was blood of his blood, but not from the right womb. Jephthah didn't know what it meant to be embraced by a father, much less by a mother. His only constant companion was silence. He grew up learning to observe. He learned that a glance could hurt more than a stone, that a whisper could sting more than a slap. From a young age, he showed strength. At 10, he faced a serpent to save a lamb. At 12, he defeated older boys in an impromptu fight. He was brave, and that made others uncomfortable, not because of his strength, but because of who he was. Son of a harlot. The neighbors said, "Nothing good can come from him," whispered the elders. At 17, the tension became unbearable. His brothers, now men, saw him as a threat, not only to the family name but to the inheritance. On a sultry night, they called him out to the fields as if it were just another day. But with words as sharp as swords, they said, "You shall not inherit our father's house with us. You are the son of another woman, a bastard. Leave now," and no one defended him. Not Gilead, not Naamah, not even the heavens. With his heart torn and pride wounded, Jephthah said not a single word. He gathered his few belongings, a worn-out cloak, an old knife, a water skin, and left. His feet bled on the rocky path, but he kept walking. For deep within his soul, a voice whispered, "You were not made to live among men. You were made for something greater." Jephthah headed east toward the hills of Tob, a barren and harsh land where the forgotten hid. There among the valleys and caves dwelled those rejected by the world, thieves, fugitives, orphans, debtors, but also men of courage marked by pain. And it was there in the dust of Tob that Jephthah found his purpose. Without meaning to, he became a leader. The men began to follow him, not for titles or inheritance, but out of respect. He defended them, guided them, shared both bread and danger. In no time the group grew. Some called him chief, others brother. He himself didn't know what name to give it. He only knew that among the rejected he was finally accepted. And in the silence of the nights under the starry sky, when all were asleep, Jephthah would look up at the constellations and ask, "Lord, was it you who pushed me to this place? Or was I the one who strayed from your path? Sometimes the answer came in the whisper of the wind, in breezes that cooled his sweaty face. Other times there was no answer at all, only the echo of silence. But Jephthah pressed on with every battle won, every friend gained, every pain overcome. He was transformed. The bastard became a warrior, the rejected a leader. However, time passed, and the silent hatred he carried toward his brothers did not fade. It was like a thorn buried beneath the skin, and no matter how hard he tried to forget them, destiny seemed to trace a winding road back. Once again, Israel found itself in danger. The people had returned to idolatry, and as punishment, the Ammonites came with force, conquering cities, subjugating tribes, humiliating the children of Jacob. The elders cried out for someone to deliver them. But who? The warriors were weary and the judges weak. No man seemed worthy until a name began to echo among the tents. Jephthah, the one from Tob, he has strength, he has courage, he has won dozens of battles. Perhaps he is the deliverer we have been waiting for. That same Jephthah they had cast out, the bastard, the son of shame. Would they now be willing to beg for his help? What would those who once despised him do now? On the hill of Tob, Jephthah sharpens his sword as he watches the horizon. His eyes do not burn with hatred, but with determination. He knows the past is about to knock on his door. But the one whom all had rejected was being prepared by God for something far greater. War was no longer a distant whisper. Now the ground trembled beneath the galloping of Ammonite horses, and the hills echoed the sound of war drums. The fortified cities began to fall one after another. The Ammonites weren't merely seeking territory. They wanted revenge, humiliation, and domination. They came like a flood, and once again, Israel found itself unprepared. The tribes tried to unite, but fear divided them more than any alliance could bring them together. In Gilead, despair spread like wildfire through dry fields. The elders gathered in silence, their faces pale and hearts heavy. The enemy's presence was as certain as the rising sun, and there was no one to lead the defense. "Who will deliver us from this calamity?" asked one of the elders, slamming his hand onto the stone table. "We have no courageous warriors left, no judges with authority. Our young men tremble, and our old men do nothing but pray." "Perhaps," murmured another, eyes lowered, "perhaps it's time we swallow our pride." A heavy silence fell over the council. Would anyone dare to say aloud what they all feared to admit? Then a hoarse voice broke the moment. Jephthah. The name lingered in the air like distant thunder. "The bastard of Gilead." Someone whispered as if it were a curse. "The very same. He was expelled, rejected by us." "Yes. But since then, I've heard he became a leader, a warrior, that he defends the weak, that he's won battles in Tob. His followers respect him more than we respect our own leaders. He is a son of shame and perhaps our only hope." In the squares of Gilead, the people were already whispering. Women hid their children, men sharpened old rusty swords, and the name of Jephthah began to rise on the lips of those who once cursed him. Would he listen to us? They wondered. Would he come back? Meanwhile, in the hills of Tob, Jephthah watched the horizon from afar. The winds blew from Gilead, carrying the scent of earth and fear. He could feel it. Something was coming. His men approached him, questions in their eyes. "Chief, I heard the Ammonites are marching west. They're invading your people's land. Your brothers, do they need you?" Jephthah did not answer. He only sharpened his sword with slow, steady movements. In his chest, the scars of the past burned. He remembered every cruel word, every look of disdain. But he also heard the voice that had long accompanied him, the one that said, "You were made for something greater." That night around the fire, Jephthah did not sleep. He stood staring at the sky as if speaking silently to his destiny. And when dawn began to break through the shadows, he knew someone would come looking for him. This was not merely a war of men. It was a reckoning between the past and his purpose. And so those who had once cast him out with harsh words would now send messengers, heads bowed, begging for his sword. The roads leading to Tob were far from easy. They twisted through arid hills, stony valleys, and regions forgotten by kings and priests alike. It was a place where men went when they had no name left, no inheritance. There the rejected built their own kingdoms, far from the glory of others. And it was to this place that the elders of Gilead came wearing heavy cloaks and shameful expressions, bringing not gifts in their packs, but pleas. For 3 days and 3 nights they rode without rest. The wind stirred the dust along the path, as if the desert itself tried to stop the meeting. They said nothing to one another. There was a weight heavier than fatigue, the weight of humiliation. They would bow before the one they had driven out with harsh words and harsh hands. But it was that or see Gilead reduced to ashes. Jephthah, on the other hand, was already waiting for them. His instincts, sharpened by years of rejection and battle, had warned him. Seated on a high stone, with his blade resting on his lap and eyes fixed on the horizon, he watched the small group approach. His men stood around him silently. No one laughed. No one celebrated. This was no ordinary visit. "That's them," said one warrior, pointing with his chin. "They've come from the east." "Do they know where they're stepping?" asked another, frowning. "We're not exactly friendly to strangers around here." Jephthah remained silent. When the elders finally arrived, they dismounted with difficulty. Their faces were marked by dust and shame. And seeing Jephthah standing proud and stronger than they remembered, they hesitated. "Jephthah, son of Gilead," began the eldest, his voice trembling. "No," Jephthah interrupted. "You never called me that." Silence fell like a stone among them. The elders exchanged glances. The youngest took a step forward, trying to compose himself. "We come in the name of the people of Gilead. Israel is being crushed. The Ammonites are marching against us, pillaging cities, enslaving women, tearing down walls. We need a leader, someone who knows how to fight, someone brave. We need you." Jephthah showed no surprise. He slowly turned and walked toward the shadow of a tree where the breeze was softer. With his back to them, he spoke with a firm voice. "When I was young, you cast me out of my home, called me a bastard, said I'd have no share in my father's inheritance. You drove me away like a dog." "Jephthah," said the eldest, trying to ease the tension. Now his voice thundered. "I lived for years in Tob. I fought for my life. I bled. I built my own people among those who were scorned like me. And now that death surrounds you, you come to me as if nothing ever happened." The men of Tob watched from a distance, ready for any sign of trouble. But Jephthah did not strike. He wanted to listen, to understand the true reason behind the proposal. The leader of the elders sighed, removing his hood and revealing his weary face. "We were wrong, Jephthah, guided by pride, by tradition. But this is no longer about the past. It's about the future of our people. If you don't come, Gilead will fall, and with it Israel." Jephthah slowly turned, locking eyes with the men who once humiliated him. In them, he saw something he had never seen before: regret. "And what do you offer me?" he asked coldly. "A horse, a sack of coins, an empty promise." The eldest hesitated before answering. "If you come with us and lead our men against the Ammonites, you will be our head over all of Gilead. Not just a war captain, but judge, leader. What you take back will be yours with honor and with your sword." It was a grand offer, but also a dangerous one. Jephthah knew the people could change their minds as quickly as the wind shifts. Still, destiny seemed to be calling him to something greater, redemption or a trap. He walked over to a stone, sat and stared at the ground for a long time. None of his warriors dared to break the silence. The elders waited in tension. "If I accept," he finally said, "and the Lord grants me victory, will you keep your word, or will you reject me again once the war ends and your fears disappear?" The elder placed a hand over his chest solemnly. "May the Lord be our witness. We will do as we've promised. You shall be head over all of us." Jephthah looked to the sky. The clouds swirled above his head as if heaven itself awaited his answer. Something inside him pulsed, an ancient calling, a wound that had never fully healed. This proposal was more than a chance for redemption. It was an open wound that could either heal or bleed out for good. He stood up. His eyes met those of each elder one by one. "I will go with you, but know this. I'm no longer the young man you cast out, and the war will change us all." The elders nodded, and for the first time since they left, they breathed with relief. But even amid hope, there was doubt. The journey back to Gilead would be long, not just in distance, but in reopened scars and stories that would need to be rewritten. Jephthah sheathed his sword, mounted his horse, and rode with a divided heart. He would fight for a people who had wounded him, but could he forgive? Or worse still, would he be wounded again? Before we continue, we ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. That blesses us and motivates us to keep sharing these powerful stories from the Bible. Now let's continue with the remarkable journey of Jephthah. The sun rose in golden hues over the hills of Gilead. As Jephthah crossed the city gates behind him, his men marched in silence, not out of fear, but out of respect. The townspeople emerged from their homes, peeking through window slits as if witnessing a ghost from the past. There were murmurs, whispers, hands raised to cover mouths. No one quite knew how to receive him as a hero or as a reminder of an old shame. Ahead, the elders awaited him. They had prepared a modest reception, no trumpets, no songs. Just the main square adorned with olive branches and incense burning on makeshift altars. It wasn't a celebration. It was an acknowledgement, and even that seemed to come at great effort. Jephthah dismounted slowly. His gaze swept the scene like a blade. He saw aged faces, eyes that had once avoided him, and children who had never heard his name, at least not with honor. He walked to the center of the square, where a high stone served as a platform. He climbed the steps one by one without hurry until he reached the top. There he took a deep breath. Israel is wounded. His voice rang out firm. Gilead is bleeding, but it is not only the enemy that weakens us. We are divided within. Pride blinds us. Tradition binds us. Fear silences us. And I am a product of all this. A reverent silence fell over the crowd. The elders bowed their heads. But I am not here for revenge. I'm here for purpose. You asked me to lead, and I accepted not for glory, but out of faith, because I believe there is still hope, even where everything seems lost. He lifted his eyes to the heavens. But I will not lead by human words. I will seek the voice of God. Jephthah stepped down from the platform and walked to the stone altar beside the square. He knelt. His hands touched the rough ground, his eyes closed. In a low but audible voice he prayed, Lord of Israel, if it is your will that I fight the Ammonites, guide me. Let it not be my sword, but your arm that brings victory. If you grant me triumph, I vow that all that comes from me shall be yours. The words, simple and solemn, were like sparks on dry straw. A murmur ran through the people. Some began to cry, others knelt as well. Something was changing, not just in the political or military field, but in the spirit of the people. That night an assembly was called. Jephthah was officially declared chief and judge of Gilead before the crowd, with torches lighting up expectant faces. He received the ring of command, an ancient bronze symbol bearing the seal of the tribes. But in his eyes there was no pride. There was weight, responsibility. While the others celebrated with hesitant songs and restrained embraces, Jephthah remained silent. He knew the greatest challenge still lay ahead. The war would not be only with the Ammonites, but with the ghosts of the past. In the dead of night, alone in his tent, Jephthah studied the maps of destroyed cities. Each marked point was a cry, each blocked route an open wound. He would need strategy. He would need faith. He would need men who trusted him, not out of fear, but from conviction. Yet before dawn could break, a messenger rushed into the camp. His clothes were torn and sweat mixed with dust on his face. "My lord," he cried breathless, "the Ammonites, they have already crossed the Jordan. They've camped near Mizpah. They are a day's march away." Jephthah showed no surprise. He simply stood, planting his feet like an oak in the midst of a storm. Then the hour has come. He ordered the captains to be summoned. He had the horses prepared. He adjusted his leather armor and wrapped his wrist with the warband he had carried since Tob. It was time to fulfill what he had vowed. Outside, the warriors of Gilead awaited him. Some were seasoned, others were just young men willing to die for a cause. Jephthah walked among them, meeting every gaze. Then he climbed the stone once more and said, "The enemy is near, but we will not win by strength. We will win through unity, through repentance, through faith. We fight not only for land, but for dignity. We fight so our daughters won't become slaves, so our sons won't be taken in chains. We fight to be free. A roar echoed among the men. Swords were raised. Hearts were set aflame. In that moment, Jephthah was no longer merely the bastard of Gilead. He was the chosen warrior, the unexpected leader, the hope of a broken people. His return was official, but the battle had only just begun. And in the field where blood would meet faith, Jephthah would face his greatest test, not just of the sword but of the soul. Dawn cloaked Mizpah in a thick mist as Jephthah distanced himself from the main camp. The field was restless. Men sharpened swords, reinforced armor, and whispered prayers. But Jephthah walked toward the top of the hill with a heavy heart and empty hands. At that moment, he was not seeking war. He was seeking understanding. At the hilltop, surrounded by a few dry trees, two messengers awaited, trustworthy men with firm speech and sharp eyes. Jephthah looked at them for a long moment, as if weighing not just words, but destinies. "You will carry a message of peace," he said in a low voice yet full of authority. "Not because we fear battle, but because we desire justice." He drew a leather scroll from within his cloak, sealed with the symbol of the tribes. He handed it to the first messenger. "These are the words of Israel to the king of Ammon. Speak them with respect." But without fear, the two men quickly mounted their horses and rode down the hill toward the valley where the Ammonite army gathered like a storm cloud on the edge of the desert. Jephthah watched them leave, then lifted his eyes to the sky. The silence of the morning seemed to wait, as if God himself held his breath. Hours later, in front of the royal tents of Ammon, the messengers were led before the king. A proud man, with a stern face and eyes hardened by time and hatred. Surrounded by generals and pagan priests, the king listened with disdain, yet allowed them to speak. Jephthah, leader of Gilead, sends words of reason, the first began. He says, "Why do you attack my land? What harm have we done to you?" The king gave no answer. He merely gestured for them to continue. The second messenger then unrolled the scroll and began to read with a firm voice. When Israel came out of Egypt, they traveled through the wilderness toward the promised land. They asked passage from Edom and Moab, but were denied. Finally, upon reaching the lands of the Amorites, they again asked for peaceful passage. But Sihon, king of the Amorites, rose against Israel with sword in hand. The Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people into our hands. Thus we conquered this land. It was not theft nor usurpation. It was survival. The king remained silent. Only his clenched jaw betrayed the growing irritation. Now you say Israel took what was yours. But where were you these past 300 years? Why did you not claim it before? It is not Israel who contends with you. It is your arrogance that leads you to war. The king's counselors began to murmur. Some called for caution. Others demanded revenge. We do not desire bloodshed without cause. The first messenger concluded, "But if you insist, know this. We do not fight alone. We fight under the justice of the Lord." Back in Mizpah, Jephthah waited. Sitting beneath the twisted olive tree at the camp's entrance, he meditated in silence. He recalled in his mind the stories of the patriarchs, the journey through the desert, the crossing of the Jordan, the promises made and kept. It was more than history. It was identity. When the messengers returned, their expressions spoke before any word left their lips. "He refused peace," said the elder, breathless. "He said he does not heed sermons or threats disguised as reason." Jephthah closed his eyes. For a moment, he seemed to feel the full weight of leadership upon his shoulders. Then he rose with resolve. "Then let the Lord be judge between us." That night, Jephthah summoned the entire army. The fires lit the tense faces of the soldiers, forming a sea of anxious silhouettes. The air was heavy, not with fear, but with destiny. Jephthah climbed a great rock, his figure projected against the flames like a sacred shadow. He did not shout. He spoke as one who trusts in what cannot be seen. "We sought peace. We told our story. But truth is not always enough to stop war. Some hearts only understand the sound of the sword." A pause, eyes fixed on him. "Minds prepared, but we will not fight for pride. We will fight for our families, for our children, for our memories. We will fight because justice needs arms." The army responded with cries of courage, swords raised, feet pounding the earth in rhythm. It was the dawn of something greater than a battle. It was the prelude to judgment. But truth is not always enough to stop war. And in the shadows of conflict, the price of victory may exceed what a human heart is able to bear. The sun was setting behind the hills when the war drums echoed from the Ammonite side. Dust kicked up by horses formed golden veils in the air, while black banners waved under the hot evening wind. The king of Ammon, impassive in his watchtower, observed the battlefield with steady eyes. To him, there was no doubt Israel would fall just like so many other tribes before them. In the Israelite camp, Jephthah silently watched the horizon tinged with red. The gleam of armor reflected the last rays of light, and the sound of preparations replaced any illusion of peace. Blacksmiths struck iron, squires rushed between tents, and warriors chanted ancient songs calling for protection. But Jephthah remained distant. He walked among the men without saying a word, like a father among sons before a storm. His mind replayed the king's refusal, the disdain in his eyes, the way he dismissed every argument as if Israel's history had no worth. He hadn't merely rejected a treaty, he had insulted the memory of an entire people. He chose the path of destruction, Jephthah finally said to the elders gathered around the main tent. Not out of necessity, but out of pride. The leaders looked at him attentively. Many still held on to hope that something might change, but the certainty was clear in Jephthah's eyes. Diplomacy had died in the enemy's words, and now blood would water the sacred soil. "May the Lord our God fight for us," declared one of the elders. "And may our hands be instruments of his justice," Jephthah added. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Thick clouds seemed to reflect the weight of what was to come. The army of Israel stood in tight ranks, spears raised, shields firm, young men beside veterans, all with faces covered in dust and faith. Jephthah rode at the front wearing a simple linen cloak unadorned, but his eyes burned with the fire of generations. In front of the battle line, he stopped, took a deep breath, then raised his voice. "We are not many, but we are not alone. We do not fight for land or riches. We fight for our story, for our freedom, for what the Lord gave us through promise and sacrifice." The silence that followed was deep like the moment before thunder. Today, we will not be remembered as men who backed down. We will be remembered as men who stood when truth was trampled. And even if we fall, our blood will cry out from the stones. Justice fought here. The soldiers struck their spears against their shields, creating a sound that spread like thunder across the valleys. It was the response, the silent pact between leaders and warriors. On the other side, the king of Ammon was finalizing his strategy. He ignored his counselors' warnings. He dismissed the messenger's words. In his mind, victory was already certain. He came with a larger army, better equipped, and a heart inflamed by old grudges. "Let them come with their God," said the king, spitting on the ground. "I will crush them with the weight of time and strength." At first light, the trumpet sounded. The Ammonite troops advanced like a raging river. A roar of war echoed through the hills, shaking the hearts of men. Jephthah, steady on his horse, raised his hand. He waited, watched the advance, and at the right moment gave the signal. The army of Israel responded with precise formation, as if the battlefield were a board, and each soldier a piece of conviction. Spears pierced the charge. Shields collided with the enemy's momentum, and the ground trembled under the weight of the clash. For hours, the field was filled with the sounds of steel, cries, dust, and pain. But there were also chants, voices that did not fall silent even amid the blows, calling upon the name of the Lord as an invisible shield. Jephthah was everywhere. He fought with the sword, yes, but also with his gaze, his voice, with the leadership that does not yield even to the fiercest winds. The king of Ammon began to sense something was wrong. His numerical advantage was not breaking Israel's lines. His men hesitated. The Israelites resisted with a fury that seemed to come from another world. When night fell, the field was covered with bodies. The battle was not over, but the first great wave had been repelled. The Ammonites withdrew, reorganizing for another attack, but Jephthah knew the king now tasted doubt. In the camp, the Israelites treated the wounded and lit small fires. Smoke rose silently like wordless prayers. Jephthah stepped away from the center, walking to a small altar of stones he had built days earlier. There alone he fell to his knees. "Lord, how far will you take me?" His face was covered in sweat and dried blood. His eyes were wet, his body exhausted, but his spirit still burned. Then he pulled from his tunic a small amulet, an old piece made of bronze and leather with forgotten inscriptions. He touched it with reverence. "Not yet," he murmured, "but if the time comes, I will fulfill it." War was inevitable, but Jephthah still held a deep secret, a silent vow that could turn victory into tragedy and faith into sacrifice. The night cloaked the camp in deep silence. No sound could be heard, except the wind blowing through the tents and rustling the dry branches of the nearby trees. Jephthah knelt before a small improvised stone altar, his head bowed as if waiting for something he himself could not define. His mother's amulet hung between his trembling fingers, still heavy with memories and faith. Then the silence was broken, not by human voices or natural sounds, but by a presence. The air seemed to change in density, as if the entire universe bent around that one man. A serene warmth flowed over his skin, his lungs filled with a different breath, almost ethereal. And in the midst of the darkness, Jephthah felt it. The Spirit of the Lord had come upon him. There were no heavenly lights, no thunder, no spectacle, only a silent, powerful, and unshakable conviction. Jephthah entered a state that transcended reason. Fear dissipated. Doubt ceased. Everything within him aligned with a mission from above. He was no longer the rejected son, the makeshift leader, or the warrior wounded by life. He was now a divine instrument. With eyes still wet and a soul consumed by reverence, he rose. Every step back to the camp felt firm, as if he walked in the very footsteps of an angel. The elders noticed first, then the soldiers. Something in him had changed. It was not visible to the common eye, but everyone felt it. Jephthah had been touched by God. Throughout the night, he reorganized the troops. It was no ordinary preparation. Every movement seemed guided by something beyond human strategy. He divided the warriors with almost prophetic precision, repositioned the tents, redrew paths, and raised up new leaders among the most unlikely. The instructions flowed from his lips like words dictated by ancient wisdom. Even the most fearful, upon hearing his voice, felt their hearts ignite with faith. It was more than leadership. It was authority clothed in anointing. It felt as if heaven itself marched with Israel. But while Jephthah's hands arranged swords, something else was being born in his heart. A quiet thought, almost imperceptible but growing. He knew war was near, that the clash with Ammon would demand everything. Victory would not be ordinary. It would require sacrifice, surrender, absolute faith. And in that silence between anointing and responsibility, an idea took shape, an offering, a vow. At dawn, Jephthah returned to the altar. The sky still bore golden tones as he knelt again. His hands were raised, his eyes fixed on the emerging light at the horizon. "Lord, if you truly deliver the Ammonites into my hands," he said, his voice firm but choked, "whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace will be yours, and I will offer it as a burnt sacrifice." There was no answer, no thunder, no audible confirmation. But something was sealed there in the invisible realm. The vow was recorded. Perhaps Jephthah imagined it would be an animal, a servant, a symbol. In his mind, faith was greater than details. He wanted to offer something pure, grand, something to show gratitude and reverence. But in that moment, his faith ignored the danger of literal interpretation. The next morning, the camp pulsed with life. The soldiers were already armed, shields raised, hearts ready. Jephthah walked among the men with the authority of a general, but the eyes of a servant of God. Today, he declared before the people, "The Lord will deliver our enemies into our hands." The collective cry that followed was like the roar of a lion. Trumpets sounded, spears gleamed in the rising sun, and Israel marched. Jephthah led them, filled with a strength that did not come from flesh. The divine presence still surrounded him, as if guided by an invisible hand. But among the men, no one knew of the vow. Not the leaders, not the soldiers, not even his closest servants, not his daughter, the young girl who filled his home with gentle laughter and radiant eyes. The one who danced among the tents, who loved her father's stories, who eagerly awaited his return each time he left on a mission. The one who would run to the gates at the sound of victory. She didn't know war was near. The anointing was upon Jephthah. Victory already loomed on the horizon. But in the silence of that vow, a shadow had been awakened. A decision had been born in the warrior's heart. But no one imagined the price it would demand. A decision is born in the heart of the warrior, but no one imagines the price it will demand. The sun had not fully risen when the camp began to stir. A thin mist covered the plain, as if nature itself wished to veil what was about to happen. The silence was thick. Even the most seasoned warriors hesitated to break it. There was something sacred in the air, something that hovered not only over spears, but over the souls of those who marched. Jephthah, mounted at the front, kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. The words he had spoken to God in the early hours still echoed within him, like a vow sealed in fire. His heart did not tremble, it burned. The Spirit of the Lord still rested upon him, now mingled with the weight of a vow no one else knew. The sound of clashing armor, the shuffle of sandals against dry earth, the creaking of carts laden with supplies, all of it formed a somber melody of preparation. Every step toward war seemed to draw deeper the roots of the decision Jephthah had made. The march was not only toward the Ammonites, but also toward a destiny quietly being drawn. Young men looked at their leaders with wide eyes. Older ones whispered prayers through clenched teeth. There was fear, yes, but there was also hope. And it was Jephthah who kept that hope alive. He walked among the ranks, looked each man in the eye, placed firm hands on their shoulders, and said in a voice filled with certainty, "The Lord is with us. Today we do not march alone." And each time he said it, a flame ignited in their chests. The soldiers raised their shields with greater resolve. Women and children watching the departure from afar shed silent tears, a mix of pride and fear. They knew their husbands and sons might not return, but they trusted Jephthah, the leader chosen by God. At midday, the army reached the pass of Mizpah, where the land opened into deep valleys and the wind blew stronger. Jephthah ordered a pause. The field ahead stretched like a sea of dust, and beyond it, the territory of the Ammonites. There, the enemy was already in position. They were prepared to crush Israel with all their might, but Jephthah did not falter. He climbed a rocky elevation and summoned all the captains. When they gathered around him, Jephthah looked at them as a father looks at sons he's about to send into battle. His face was calm, but his eyes held more than men could understand. "Listen," he said, raising his voice against the wind. "You know the story of our fathers. You know the Lord brought us out of Egypt, parted the sea, sustained us in the wilderness. We are the living inheritance of miracles, and today we will write another page in that story." The men nodded silently, absorbing every word like nourishment for the soul. "They have more warriors," Jephthah continued. "More weapons, more resources, but we have the favor of the Most High. And if God is for us, who can be against us?" A murmur of approval spread through the group. Some began pounding their chests. Others raised their spears to the sky. "We will march as one man," Jephthah proclaimed. "And when we step onto the battlefield, we will not fight for glory or revenge, but for the justice of our God." His words ignited their hearts. A cry rose from the crowd like a living wave. Jephthah descended from the elevation, and in that moment the army was more than armed men. They were a people lifted by faith. But even among the shouts of courage and prayers, Jephthah's heart beat with a silent weight. None of the soldiers knew what he had promised. None of the captains knew of the covenant sealed on his altar. And still he led them with conviction, because the decision was already made. The army resumed its march now over rougher terrain. The trees grew sparse and the air grew drier. In the distance, they could already see the enemy's banners. The sons of Ammon were also ready, their tents aligned, their riders in position, their archers watching from hilltops. The tension was as dense as the afternoon heat. Jephthah, however, did not avert his gaze. He knew this was the moment he was born for. Every insult he had suffered, every rejection, every scar, all had prepared him for this. And now, even with his soul marked by a dark vow, he felt he was exactly where he needed to be. The war drums began to beat. From the Ammonite side, savage cries filled the air. It was the final call. The battle was inevitable. Jephthah raised his arm, and his soldiers halted. He took a deep breath. The silence before the clash felt endless, as if time itself awaited his command. "Advance!" he shouted. The ground shook. Sandals pounded the earth. The clash of weapons against shields made the air vibrate. And as the army of Israel surged forward like a furious wave against its enemies, Jephthah marched ahead with the Spirit of the Lord upon him and a secret burning in his chest like fire. The earth trembled, yes, but deep in his heart something even more intense stirred. A premonition, a fear that even faith could not silence. Something was coming. Something not just war. Something personal, irreversible. Something that would change everything. The earth trembled, but Jephthah's heart hid something even greater. The battlefield stretched before them like a desert of expectation. The troops were in position, rows of warriors aligned like waves, ready to crash against the sands of destiny. The sound of drums echoed through the hills, deep and steady, like the beating of a giant heart. Each beat was a reminder of what was to come, each note a harbinger of blood. The army of Israel stood firm, but not calm. Sweat dripped down tense faces. Hands trembled slightly as they gripped spears and shields. The wind blew heavy with dust and with fear. It was the silence before the sword, the waiting that tears at the soul more than the battle itself, the moment when men are forced to face the abyss between life and death. Jephthah walked among them with heavy steps. His presence was like a wall. The eyes of the warriors followed him, not seeking orders, but courage. He was the thread that stitched that multitude together, the link between earth and heaven. But Jephthah said nothing. He just walked, thought, prayed in silence. There was something on his face, something even his closest companions couldn't decipher. It wasn't fear nor anger. It was weight, a burden that could not be shared. He carried something beyond the sword, beyond strategy, beyond war. A few steps from the front line, Jephthah stopped. He took a deep breath, observed the enemy. In the distance, the Ammonites were also ready, their horses neighing nervously. Their round shields gleamed under the sun like eyes of steel. Their red banners fluttered like flames in search of sacrifice. The Israelite leader stepped back, distancing himself from the noise, the shouts of the captains, the agitation of the shield bearers. He needed silence. He needed the one who had always been with him. From the rejection in his childhood to the secret altar of the night before, Jephthah climbed a small hill covered in dry stones and low shrubs. There alone, he lifted his eyes to the heavens, and the sky was clear, almost too calm for what was about to happen. He knelt down, placed both hands on the ground, and began to pray. His words were not heard by men. There was no one there to witness that moment. Not even his soldiers knew where he was. It was a moment stolen from war, a sacred breath before the explosion. Jephthah's eyes closed. His lips murmured things only God would understand. He wasn't asking for victory. He wasn't asking for fame. He wasn't thinking of glory nor of leadership. This was something else more intimate, more difficult. The wind ceased for a moment. The dust settled to the ground as if in reverence. Jephthah wept, not loud tears, but silent ones. The kind that don't fall from the face, but hide in the eyes as if afraid to come out. There on that improvised altar, Jephthah said something to the Lord, something that was not recorded, something no one heard, but something that would change everything. When he rose, his expression had changed. There was no more hesitation, no more shadow of doubt. His body seemed heavier, yes, but his mind was as sharp as a blade. He descended the hill with firm steps, and when he returned to the ranks, the men felt the difference. It was as if he wore an invisible armor, a silence that commanded respect. Jephthah didn't need to shout to lead. His presence alone was enough to ready them for impact. The captain of the vanguard approached. "Sir, the drums have intensified." "They're coming," Jephthah nodded slowly. His gaze pierced the enemy line as if he could already see the end of the battle, as if he were reading the ending of a story written by divine hands. "Let the men be ready," he said in a low but firm voice. "The Lord will bring justice." The captain withdrew, passing along the orders. Jephthah then walked to the center of the line between the banners of Israel. There he raised his sword. The blade's shine reflected the cloudless sky, and all eyes turned to him. "Today we do not fight for land alone, nor for honor," he declared. "We fight because we were provoked, wronged, and challenged. But we are not a people who live by vengeance. We are servants of the Most High God." A cry responded, at first timid, then deafening, a roar of faith like thunder from a living mountain. Jephthah took a deep breath once more. Yes, the battle was about to begin. Yes, he would lead his people with all the strength of the Spirit. But in his heart, the secret prayer still echoed, a silent conversation between a man and his God. And within it, there was a confession, a request, or perhaps a surrender. But what exactly did he say to the Lord? No one knows. Yet the sun was still high in the sky when the silence of the field was finally broken. A war cry tore through the air, deep, brutal, charged with urgency and faith. Jephthah, at the head of the army of Israel, raised his sword firmly and pointed it toward the enemy. It was the signal. The men advanced. The ground shook. The drums fell silent, as if honoring the roar of the crowd now charging into the unknown. Dust rose in thick clouds, momentarily concealing the scene of the imminent war. The banners of Israel fluttered among spears and cries, crossing the field with the fury of a storm long held back. On the other side, the Ammonites responded with brutality. Their ranks organized quickly, forming walls of shields, spears like teeth ready to bite. The warriors of Ammon were experienced, forged in other battles, and confident in their numerical advantage. But they hadn't counted on the fire burning in the hearts of Israel. Jephthah led from the front line. He did not command from afar. He fought, he struck, he dodged. He was like lightning among the enemies, swift, precise, relentless. Each of his movements inspired those around him. Wherever Jephthah passed, the fear in Israel's soldiers melted like mist before the fire. He was more than a warrior. He was a symbol of redemption. The rejected son now liberating his nation. The battle was fierce. The sound of steel clashing with steel filled the air like thunderous music. Cries of pain, pleas for help, supplications to God, and the dry hiss of arrows cutting through the air wove into a symphony of sacrifice. But Jephthah did not allow himself to be distracted. His eyes sought not only the enemy, but also the promise, the secret, the memory of what he had said to God alone on that mountain. Inside he was torn. The sword in his hand moved with conviction, but the heart hesitated. Each step toward victory was also a step closer to the consequence of the vow. Israel's troops began breaking through the enemy lines. Where there had once been resistance, now there was disorder. The Ammonites began to fall back. Their commanders shouted orders, trying to maintain formation. But the strength and faith of the Israelites broke their defenses like a current against a fragile dam. Jephthah saw the enemy line split in two. He pressed forward even more, and then, like lightning illuminating the night, he realized the victory was theirs. Israel would triumph. It was inevitable. And yet, instead of joy, a chill ran down his spine. He remembered the words he had spoken alone in that silent meeting with God. A vow, a surrender, a promise made not aloud but in spirit. "Lord, if you give me the victory." He closed his eyes for a moment, even in the midst of war. The sounds around him grew distant, as if everything was submerged in water. And at the bottom of that silence, he heard it again. His own voice and the echo of the vow. The people were shouting now, celebrating. The soldiers of Israel, seeing the enemies flee, allowed themselves to smile. Many fell to their knees in the field, raising their hands to the heavens. Others wept out of relief, out of faith, out of victory. The war drums were replaced by songs of praise. But Jephthah did not smile. He did not cry. He simply walked slowly across the field among bodies and broken weapons, feeling the weight of what was to come. For all the men there, that day was one of glory for Jephthah. It was the beginning of the reckoning. The general of the Ammonites was captured. Many of the survivors fled in desperation. The enemy flags were burned, and the banners of Israel were planted in the ground as witnesses of divine justice. The elders of Gilead ran to meet Jephthah with wide smiles and open arms, and the crowd began to surround him, chanting his name. Jephthah, Jephthah, Jephthah. But he, with empty eyes, only nodded, as if each cheer were a nail, each praise a stone on the path back. As the people sang and danced, Jephthah mounted his horse and looked toward the horizon. The dust was settling. The sky looked bluer, but his heart was gray. He rode slowly, distancing himself from the shouts, the applause, the music, and the wine that had begun to flow. He rode alone, as at the beginning, as always, while the people celebrated. Jephthah remembered. He remembered the hill, the silence, the prayer, and the vow, the one no one heard, the one no one understood. But he knew exactly what he had said, and now he would have to fulfill it. While the people celebrated, Jephthah remembered the words he had spoken alone. The afternoon sky seemed to sing with Israel. The winds blew like invisible flutes between the hills, and the fields that once trembled under the steps of war now pulsed with life, joy, and praise. The people, overtaken by uncontrollable jubilation, lifted their eyes to the heavens and danced as if reborn. The victory over the Ammonites was not merely a military triumph. It was a spiritual liberation, a miracle witnessed by thousands. The streets of Gilead filled with voices. Men, women, elders, and children poured out of their homes as if led by a common force. Drums echoed, flutes chimed, and bare feet beat against the earth in an ancestral rhythm. They cried out Jephthah's name with the reverence of one invoking a savior. Jephthah, still clad in armor marked by war, rode back along the main road. His imposing figure was visible from afar. As he approached, people ran to meet him, throwing wildflowers on the ground like a carpet of honor. Some held their cloaks in the air. Others lifted their children so they could see the face of their liberator. Everyone wanted to touch his hand, his horse, his shadow. But Jephthah did not smile. He gave thanks with brief nods, restrained gestures. His gaze was distant, as if piercing through the crowd and seeing something far beyond human eyes. Each cry of hero echoed within him as a reminder of the silent price that had yet to be paid. The elders awaited him by the city gate. Their garments were clean, their faces solemn but full of pride. The high priest approached, extended a crown of laurels, and placed it on his head. The crowd erupted in applause. The earth seemed to vibrate with the sound of gratitude. In that moment, Jephthah became the most celebrated judge in Israel. The eyes of the people were upon him. But Jephthah's eyes were elsewhere. Far back in the crowd, away from the pomp and celebration, he saw the shadow of what he had vowed. None of the smiling faces could guess. No one knew of the whispered prayer, but he knew. And God knew too. The feast began. The plazas were filled with makeshift tables, jars of wine, baskets of dates and roasted meat. Children ran between the legs of adults, laughing and shouting, unaware of the weight that hung over the heart of the man who had freed their land. Elders recounted tales of past wars. Women sang songs, and torches were lit as night fell, bringing with it the glow of fire and the warmth of fellowship. Jephthah agreed to sit with the elders. He accepted the wine, accepted the bread, but his soul was restless. His eyes fixed on the road from which he had come, and inside he relived, scene by scene, the solemn moment of that promise. Lord, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in peace shall be yours. I will offer it as a burnt offering. He recalled every syllable, every pause, every heartbeat as he spoke those words. It had not been an impulsive vow. It was no bluff. It was real, sincere, and now it was about to be fulfilled. But no one knew. The music grew louder. Someone began a new song, praising Jephthah with improvised verses. The children repeated the chorus, clapping their hands, laughing, spinning like leaves in the wind. The elders danced with dignity, and the young cried out for more wine, more stories, more future. Jephthah, however, asked to leave. He rose in silence, nodded his thanks, and walked away from the circle of light. The elders respected it. They said the hero deserved rest. No one followed him. No one noticed the weight of the silence that accompanied him. The night was calm. He walked alone down the road that would lead him back to his home. The sounds of the celebration faded with each step. The stars emerged in the sky, silent witnesses to the anguish that grew in Jephthah's chest like an invisible blade. It was as if time slowed. Each grain of sand beneath his feet, each leaf rustling in the wind, all seemed to whisper, "It is coming." When the rooftops of his house began to appear among the trees, Jephthah stopped. He took a deep breath. Cold sweat trickled down his neck. His heart felt heavy as lead. And then, from the other side of the hill, a voice, a song, soft, pure. He recognized it immediately. It was his daughter's voice, his only one. The light of his old age, the legacy of his name, the reflection of all he had lost in his youth and reclaimed through effort. She sang with joy. She ran to meet her father, innocent, unaware. And then she appeared, emerging from the doorway of the house, dancing to drums. She came forth with a smile as wide as the horizon, a crown of flowers on her head and a tambourine in her hands. "Father!" she shouted, arms wide open, running toward him. And in that instant, the ground vanished beneath Jephthah's feet. The world spun. Victory turned to ashes in his mouth. He fell to his knees. He tore his garments. And he cried out, not like a warrior, but like a broken man. But no one knew that joy would carry with it an invisible sword. The path to his home was a road of dust and silence. The glory of victory was left behind, and before him stood the promise he had made to God, a promise no one had heard, but one that all of heaven kept as witness. The moon had already risen, an eye in the sky, silvering the leaves of the trees, and casting long shadows across the earth. The air was cool, almost too calm for a heart that beat like a war drum. Jephthah walked as one carrying an invisible burden, each step heavier than the last. His house appeared among the hills, modest, surrounded by vineyards and wildflowers, just as he had left it. No sign of tragedy, no omen of what was about to unfold. It was the image of peace, of home, of return, and then a sound. First soft, then growing, music, a tambourine danced in the air, accompanied by rhythmic claps and a melodic, familiar, pure voice. "My father has triumphed. My father has returned. Let us praise the God of Israel." Jephthah stopped. The world around him stopped. The door of the house opened with the gentleness of joy. And there she was, his daughter, his only daughter, dancing with bare feet adorned with colorful ribbons, her hair loose in the wind, a crown of flowers on her head, and her eyes shining like dawn. She came toward him with a heart full of love, praising God with every step, every smile. She didn't know. She couldn't know. Jephthah's chest tightened like never before. The victory over the Ammonites, the people's cries, the praises, everything vanished. Now there was only her, and the vow. He collapsed to his knees in the middle of the path, as if his soul had been torn from his body. A cry, the tearing of garments. "No, my daughter, no," said Jephthah, his voice scraping his throat like iron on stone. "Why? Why were you the one to come out first from the door?" She stopped. The tambourine slipped from her hands. The music ceased. The smile died on her face. "Father," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. "What's wrong?" He wept like a man who had faced battles but lost in the heart. His shoulders shook, his hands covered his face. The daughter ran to him, kneeling by his side. "Father, please talk to me." He lifted his eyes once ablaze with courage, now flooded with pain. "I made a vow to the Lord, my daughter, a terrible vow. When I went to war, I pleaded with the Most High to give me victory. And I promised that whatever came out first from the door of my house, when I returned in peace, would be given to him as a burnt offering." She didn't move, didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply remained there. The silence between them was thick, like a fog of pain. "And it was you," he choked. "My daughter, my only daughter." She closed her eyes. A soft wind passed between them. No birds sang, no leaves danced. The world seemed to have stopped to listen to the weight of that promise. When she opened her eyes again, they were different. There was no anger, no despair. There was understanding and something even stronger, faith. "My father, if you have made a vow to the Lord, fulfill it. The God who gave us victory is the same who will hear our pain. If this is his will, I accept it." Jephthah bowed down as if the ground had pulled his soul into its depths. She embraced him. There on that unmarked road, between promise and sacrifice, father and daughter were united like never before. Not by the blood of war, but by the blood of faith, by surrender, by fear of the God of Israel. But she made one request. "Let me go for 2 months. I and my friends will go to the mountains. We will mourn. We will dance. We will lament my virginity. And then, Father, I will return." He nodded, his head heavy, his heart torn between love and the vow. And so she departed alongside her friends. She went up into the hills. For days, the sound of their songs echoed through the mountains, sweet songs, sad ones, but full of honor. And Jephthah waited. Each night felt like an eternity. Every star in the sky was a reminder of what was coming. He did not sleep. He did not eat. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, and each dawn hurt more than the last. Until she returned, why did Jephthah's joy turn into sorrow? What did he promise in secret? The answer is about to be fulfilled. The sun was still asleep when she descended from the hills. Morning mist cloaked the landscape like a translucent veil, shrouding each stone, each leaf, each step in mystery. Her friends followed in silence. Their eyes were red, not from fear, but from farewell. Jephthah's daughter walked like someone who understood the weight of time, like someone who had already wept all she could, and now moved forward, with the dignity of one who accepts destiny, even without fully understanding it. When her father's house appeared on the horizon, a gentle breeze brushed her face. She took a deep breath and did not hesitate. Jephthah was waiting outside. He looked older, his hair unkempt, beard long, eyes sunken as if 20 years had passed in 2 months. The hands that once held a sword with strength now trembled. She stopped before him. The world fell silent once more. "Father, I'm here," she said, her voice steady yet soft. He looked at her as if seeing a ghost, as if her presence were both a miracle and a curse. "You came back," he whispered, trying to hold back the flood of emotion. "You truly came back?" She nodded with a faint smile. But there was pain there, something unspoken. "I kept my part," she continued. "Now keep yours." But Jephthah didn't respond. Instead, he fell to his knees before her. She stepped back, startled. "Father!" He took her hands firmly, gripping them as if the gesture could keep her from disappearing. "My daughter, my little girl, forgive me." She leaned down, kneeling with him. "Forgive you for what, Father?" The tears fell. "When I went to war, I pleaded with God for victory. And I said that if he granted it, I would offer as a sacrifice the one who first came out of the door of my house upon my return." She said nothing, just looked at him, her eyes steeped in a profound silence. "I never imagined, never dreamed that it would be you." She took a deep breath. "I already knew, Father." He froze. The world froze. "When I saw the horror in your eyes, when I saw your torn garments, the scream trapped in your throat, I knew. Maybe not with words, but with my soul. I knew it wasn't just fear. It was something greater, something from the heavens." He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. "I hoped it wasn't true," she continued, her voice cracking. "But the days in the mountains only confirmed it. Every verse we sang, every tear we shed was for this moment." She placed her hand on her father's face. "And even so I came back because I am your daughter, and I am also a daughter of the God of Israel. And a vow made to him must be honored." Jephthah wept, not like a warrior, but like a father who, though surrounded by the glory of victory, found himself defeated. Then she for the first time cried before him, a cry not born of fear, but of surrender. A farewell to youth, to festivals, to dancing, to the love she would never know. A cry that only women who love deeply can release. Her friends at a distance watched with tear-filled eyes, holding themselves back from running to her, from begging for everything to change. But they knew it would not. And there, kneeling between the house and the hills, between heaven and the vow, father and daughter sealed their fate. She embraced her father tightly. "Just tell me that the Lord heard your vow, that he will accept it." Jephthah, still weeping, answered in a low voice, "I don't know if he asked for it, but I know he heard it." She nodded, eyes closed. A solitary tear ran down her face. The wind began to blow again. Clouds gathered on the horizon, as if nature too understood that this was a moment that would echo through generations. The sacrifice was not only physical, it was symbolic. It was the sacrifice of a generation, of a lineage of the future. The answer would come, but the pain was already growing like an inevitable shadow, and the altar was yet to be built. Night fell early that day, as if the sky itself could not bear to witness what would unfold beneath its stars. Jephthah's house, once lit by the torches of victory, was now wrapped in dense darkness. Inside, only two shadows occupied the hard-packed floor of the main room, a father and his daughter. No words had been spoken since the embrace in the courtyard. Silence was more eloquent than any speech, but the time had come. Truth needed to take shape, and it was about to rise like a wall between them. Jephthah took a deep breath. He rose slowly, walked to the center of the room, where there was a small stone slab, the house's altar once used only for prayers. He stopped there, facing his daughter. She did not move. Her eyes were fixed on him, serene yet alert. She knew the moment had arrived. He placed his hand on the altar as one who confesses with the body before speaking. Before the war, he began, his voice low, as if fearing the walls might hear. I was alone. He closed his eyes, reliving the moment. The people still doubted me. The elders looked at me with suspicion. The enemy marched strong, and the hills were full of foreign drums. I was afraid. A pause. So I went to the Lord in the middle of the night in silence, and I pleaded. His daughter's heart tightened. Still she remained calm. I said, Lord, if you deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, I will make a vow, and whatever comes out first from the door of my house when I return in peace shall be yours. I will offer it as a burnt offering without hesitation. Silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to bend time. His daughter simply breathed slowly. There was no shock, no screams, no protest, only understanding. She closed her eyes, a solitary tear rolling down her cheek. It was for me, she whispered. Jephthah collapsed to his knees. It wasn't supposed to be you. I imagined an animal, a servant, anything else. I never imagined that my victory would bring such pain. She walked to him, sat by his side. But it did, and now it's time to fulfill it. He turned to her, desperate. I can take it back. I can find another way. Pay another price. She placed her hand on his shoulder. A vow to the Lord is not a jest, Father, not even for you, the deliverer of Israel. A vow is a promise sealed with faith. But it's unfair, he shouted. Unfair to you, to me, to the people. She looked him in the eye. You were the one who spoke the words. It was God who heard them, and it was he who gave you the victory. Now the promise must be fulfilled. Jephthah trembled, as he had never trembled on the battlefield. I am your only daughter, he murmured, as if trying to escape reality with that reminder. You have no other children. There is no lineage, no inheritance. She smiled sweetly, resigned. Then let me be remembered as the one who sealed her people's victory with honor. Let my life be an altar of justice, and let Israel know that the Lord is God. The father wept like a child. She wiped his tears with the hem of her dress. But will you grant me one last wish? He nodded, too weak to speak. Let me return to the mountains for 2 more days. I wish to say goodbye to my youth and sing with my friends one last time. Jephthah nodded again, unable to utter a word. She rose, her cloak fluttering with the wind that slipped through the cracks in the house. Before leaving, she looked at him one final time. Do not weep anymore, Father. A vow may cut like a sword, but it can also heal like oil. May my offering bring peace to your heart and honor to the name of our God. And then she departed with the same grace with which she had arrived, leaving Jephthah alone, bowed before the altar. That night the people learned the truth, but there was no scandal, no revolt. There was silence, respect, and a deep reverence before a God who hears even the most dangerous promises. Jephthah's daughter became a symbol not of tragedy, but of faithfulness. A living reminder that words have power and that what is offered to God can never be taken back. What did Jephthah offer to God in exchange for victory? Now it is revealed, but it is not over. The altar still awaits and the heavens still watch. The sun was still asleep when Jephthah's daughter set out for the mountains, wrapped in a blue cloak, her braids loose and her eyes fixed on the horizon. At her side, 3 friends walked with her, silent, loyal, hearts broken inside but outwardly steady. There was no hurry. Each step was a farewell. They reached the top of the hill before noon. There, where the wind blew strong and wild flowers grew between the stones, she built a small altar with her own hands, not for sacrifice but for remembrance, a space for worship, a place where her soul could rest. The days passed in a rhythm of tears and laughter, of soft songs and deep silences. Jephthah's daughter's face bore no marks of fear, only of anticipated longing. She knew she would leave life, but not hope. One afternoon, as a sweet breeze blew, she picked flowers and made a crown. She placed it on her head as if she were a bride. Her friends looked at her in silence. "This is my covenant with the Lord," she said with a small smile. "I will not have a husband, but the God of Israel has chosen me for something greater than marriage, greater than descendants. He chose me to be a living memory of faithfulness." They wept, but she did not. At nightfall, they sang songs that spoke of childhood, of the sound of drums during village festivals, of stories told by the fire, of the smell of bread baked by her mother before she left this world. Songs of faith of the God who walked with Abraham, who spoke to Moses, who opened the sea and fed Elijah with ravens, the same God to whom she now fully belonged. One morning, as she watched the light touch the dew-covered stones, she lay down on the grass. She opened her arms as if to embrace the sky, and she breathed deeply. "I was not born to reign," she said, looking upward, "but I was born to fulfill." Her friends surrounded her, holding her hands, fingers intertwined. "Sister," one whispered, "we can still run. We can go down the mountain and disappear into another land. We can create a new name, a new story." She only smiled. "But I am the daughter of Jephthah, and a daughter of Israel, and a daughter of the Most High God." She stood with dignity. She placed the flower crown on the improvised altar. The sacrifice is not death, my friends. The sacrifice is to give oneself completely without resistance. My body is His, my name is His, and my story will be told through generations, not for sorrow, but for surrender. On the 40th day, as the sun rose in golden tones, she prepared herself. She descended the mountain with steady steps, like one walking to a wedding altar. But it was another kind of union, a covenant with the eternal. Behind her, the friends sang a soft hymn, a farewell, a celebration. There were no screams, no despair, only reverence. Upon arriving at the village, the people bowed in silence. They all knew what was about to happen, and no one dared interrupt the moment. Jephthah waited before the altar, his face aged by 40 days. When he saw her, his legs weakened, but she walked to him, touched his face, and whispered, "It's all right, Father." "It's all right," he didn't reply. He just held her hand firmly, tenderly. At the altar, the priest lit the fire, but no one spoke of death. Scripture is silent on the exact outcome. Some say she was sacrificed, others that she lived consecrated to the Lord in eternal celibacy as a symbol of devotion. But what is known is that she never married, never had children, and never cursed her father nor the Lord. Her memory was recorded. Every year, the young women of Israel would go up to the mountains to remember her. They sang songs in her honor, and they told the younger girls about the daughter who danced with tambourines and then climbed the mountains to weep and still never ceased to believe. Her story was passed from generation to generation, not as a lament, but as an offering, a whole life in response to a promise. The daughter who once danced now wept, but never cursed her father nor her God. And in the silence of the hills, her voice still echoes, awaiting the final chapter of the promise. The day dawned without wind. The trees did not sway. The birds did not sing. It was as if creation waited in reverence for the most silent moment in Jephthah's story. She had returned, dressed in white, her feet still covered in the dust of the mountains, her eyes serene like a lake at sunrise. No sign of regret, no shadow of fear. Jephthah's daughter walked as one who had already crossed death, and in a way she had. The people gathered in silence. The same people who had once acclaimed him as a hero now looked at him with different eyes. a mixture of admiration, awe, and a kind of reverence that only arises when one witnesses a love beyond human understanding. Jephthah waited before the altar, but not as a judge, nor as a leader. He stood there as a father and as a servant, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights, his face pale with sorrow. In his hands the scroll rolled tightly, the vow he had made in secret, a vow he never imagined would have a face. But now it did, and it was the face he loved most. She approached him, touched his face, gently brushed his beard like a child trying to comfort a wounded father. "Who fulfill what you have spoken to the Lord, Father," she whispered. "I am your daughter, but above all, I am his." He tried to speak, but the words were lost before they could be born. The daughter turned, walked to the altar, and there knelt. Her white garments touched the ground like snow upon dry earth. The priest approached, hesitant with teary eyes, and then silence took over. No one knows exactly what happened at that altar. The Bible does not describe it in detail. The sacred text remains intentionally vague. Some believe she was sacrificed as a burnt offering, as the vow declared. Others hold that she was consecrated to the Lord, separated from ordinary life, living in purity and solitude, a living sacrifice. But what no one denies is the impact. Jephthah fell to his knees, his hands over his face. The tears held back for 40 days now flowed like rivers breaking their banks. He did not scream. He only wept. He wept like a father who gave up what he loved most. He wept like a man who defeated armies but lost his home. He wept like one who loved God but did not know the cost of the promise would be his very heart. And the people watched. As the days passed, the memory of Jephthah's daughter grew among the tribes. Women began to ascend the mountains every year at the same time to remember her. It was more than mourning. It was reverence, a solemn lament, a remembrance. That faithfulness has a name, a face, and sometimes it demands everything. This tradition remained for generations. The daughters of Israel gathered, sang songs, and told the story of the girl who danced with tambourines and then wept in the mountains, but never murmured against her father, nor against God. Jephthah, for his part, continued to lead Israel for 6 more years, but he was never the same. In the battles that followed, he won with the sword, but without singing. At celebrations he smiled, but without light in his eyes. His heart was split between the honor of a vow fulfilled and the wound of a love surrendered. Some say he never entered his daughter's room again, that he left a lamp burning there day and night. Others say that every morning he would walk to the door, look to the horizon, and return in silence. There was no statue made for Jephthah, but his story was engraved in the heavens, in the hills, in the mountains where young women still gather today. Not as a tragedy, but as a living memory that some vows save nations and break hearts. Not as a mistake, but as a sacrifice. And in heaven, perhaps there is still a dance waiting to be finished. The dance interrupted by a vow, but not forgotten by God. The vow brought salvation to a nation and eternal pain to a father. But in the silence between the sacrifice and eternity, heaven still holds an answer that man may never fully understand. The ashes of the war with the Ammonites had not yet cooled when a new fire began to burn. This time within their own house, the tribe of Ephraim marched furiously toward Gilead. They did not bring drums of celebration, but swords in hand. The faces of their leaders were dark as storm clouds. They did not come as brothers. They came as accusers. "Why didn't you call us to fight against the Ammonites, Jephthah?" They shouted before the people. "Did you think you could win on your own? Now that the victory is yours, do you want to erase Ephraim's name from the history of Israel?" Jephthah stood before them, not with the same heart as before, broken and tender, but with a gaze hardened by all he had lost. The man who had returned from war was not the same who had left. The pain etched into his soul had carved a different face, a colder face, a firmer one, more dangerous. "I sent messengers," he replied, voice restrained, "and you did not come. When I saw there would be no help, I risked my own life and marched. The Lord gave me the victory, and now you rebuke me." But Ephraim refused to listen. Gilead is just a bunch of fugitives between Ephraim and Manasseh, they mocked. You're nothing but ruthless men without tribe, without inheritance. We'll burn your house down today, Jephthah." The crowd of Gilead was filled with astonishment. It was the first time Israel's sword had turned against itself since ancient times. Brother against brother, tribes of the same covenant, threatening to destroy each other. But Jephthah did not back down. He raised his hand. Silence fell like a blade. And then, with an authority that did not ask permission but simply commanded, Jephthah answered, "If you want war, you shall have it." The battle broke out with the fury of thunder. The hills of Gilead, once marked by the footsteps of dances and mourning, now trembled under the weight of shields and spears. The people who had wept with Jephthah now fought by his side. Men who had buried their pain in silence now roared across the fields like wounded lions. Ephraim was strong, numerous, proud, but they underestimated the fury of a people who already knew the taste of loss. They underestimated the power of a man who had already offered everything he had on the altar of a vow. Jephthah used bold tactics. He surrounded the Jordan crossing, set ambushes. He knew the land like his own veins. Every cave, every ravine, every shadow was a weapon in his hands. When the men of Ephraim tried to flee, Jephthah established a test. Only those who could correctly pronounce the word Shibboleth were allowed to pass. But the Ephraimites, because of their accent, said Sibboleth, and that was enough. With each mistake came a strike. It was a massacre. 42,000 men of Ephraim fell in that fratricidal conflict. Israelite blood stained the promised land. The sword that once defended now divided, and Jephthah stood at the center of it all. But he did not smile. He did not raise his arms. He did not celebrate. The victory felt like ashes, like dust covering the heart. At the end of the battle, he walked alone among the bodies. He did not speak. He did not cry. He simply walked like a man, carrying an invisible burden upon his shoulders. His eyes searched for something, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps meaning, but they found nothing. The people hailed him once more, a hero, a judge, a man of war. But Jephthah didn't hear them. The war with the Ammonites had ended. The victory was complete. The war with Ephraim also came to an end. The victory absolute. But something within Jephthah had broken beyond repair. A crack within that neither time nor glory nor blood could mend. His daughter was gone. His faith had been tested. Now even the unity of Israel lay in pieces, and his hands were stained with the blood of his own brothers. That night Jephthah returned to the place where his daughter once danced. He sat at the edge of the house where silence now dwelled. He lit the lamp and stared at the flickering flame. It was as if he saw the reflection of his own heart. Still burning but trembling. The external war was over, but the internal ones were just beginning, and some battles a man fights alone, even when the whole nation calls him a hero. The battlefield had grown quiet. The cries had ceased. The torches had been extinguished, and Israel once again was at peace. Jephthah the warrior, Jephthah the deliverer, Jephthah the man who faced nations and his own brothers. Now he was Jephthah the judge. For 6 years he ruled Israel not by lineage nor by titles, but by the weight of his decisions, the firmness of his voice, and the story he carried on his shoulders. He was respected, feared, honored, but rarely understood. He did not care for pomp. He refused banquets, avoided speeches. He preferred the silence of stones to empty words. His throne was simple, his gaze distant, his name whispered with reverence. The people obeyed him, but rarely saw him smile. When children passed him on the streets of Gilead, they would stop, watch, and whisper to their mothers, "Is it true he defeated the Ammonites alone? Is it true he overcame Ephraim? And is it true he made an impossible vow?" The mothers wouldn't answer. They would simply squeeze their children's hands and keep walking. There was a mystery around Jephthah, something no one dared to break. Like a morning that had never ended, like a song cut off in the middle of its melody. His heart seemed absent, as if it had been buried with something or someone. In court, Jephthah was just never hasty, always attentive. He listened to every case with patience. His justice was swift, but not merciless. His sense of right and wrong came from a deep place, shaped by pain and experience. When he spoke, all listened. When he ruled, no one questioned, but there was a pattern, a detail few noticed. He'd never judged cases involving vows or promises. He always passed them to others quietly, almost imperceptibly, but always. On certain nights he would walk to the hills alone. He would climb the same path his daughter had walked with her friends 2 months before the sacrifice. There among stones and flowers he would sit. For hours, without speaking a word, just staring at the sky, some shepherds from a distance would see his silhouette against the moon. A still man as if conversing with the stars or with God himself. No one followed him. No one disturbed him. That moment was sacred. An old servant who had served in Jephthah's house before the war once said he still keeps her room intact. The clothes, the dance instruments, even the crown of flowers she wore. Every month on the same day, he enters that room, lights a lamp, and doesn't leave until dawn. The people respected him. They didn't gossip, but they felt it. There was a weight in the air whenever Jephthah's name was spoken, a reverence tinged with sorrow. He wasn't like the other judges. He didn't build cities. He didn't celebrate victories. He didn't compose songs. He simply kept the peace with firm hands and a silent heart. During those 6 years, Israel prospered. The land was cultivated. Enemies were silent. The tribes began to cooperate again. But there was always that sense as if the soul of the nation was mourning alongside its judge. And he, with a weary gaze, watched it all with gratitude and longing. Jephthah never married, had no other children. He devoted himself entirely to the people, to justice, to memory. Some said that once a group of elders tried to convince him to take a new wife, to leave descendants. He simply replied, "I've already given my descendants to God," and turned away. No more words. That very night he was seen once again walking toward the hill, with slow steps like one climbing to visit a grave. His hair was now graying, his skin marked by sun and war, but his eyes still held the same intense glow, the glow of one who had seen glory and paid for it. He wasn't seeking redemption nor compassion, only silence and perhaps deep inside forgiveness. Not that he regretted loving God, never. But he mourned the pain it had cost, the vow made in faith and fulfilled in tears. To have been judge among men and accused by his own soul. For 6 years he lived among the people but as a stranger in his own home. He was a judge, but no one dared judge him a hero. But he did not see himself as such. The last time he was seen in public, he sat at the city gate, watching a group of young girls dancing. He smiled, a short smile, barely noticeable but real. Then he stood and was never seen there again. How many times did he think of his daughter? Every day, perhaps. And maybe in silence, she answered from above, with the same love she had shown in her final dance. Time passed. Generations were born and passed away. Kings rose. Prophets were heard. But among so many names and deeds, one story remained. A story that was never erased. Even without grand victories or spectacular miracles, it was the story of a young girl who danced and then wept, of a father who conquered and then bled. It was the story of Jephthah's daughter. Every year, in the same month, the young women of Israel would gather. They left their homes, left their embroidery in jars, took simple instruments, flower crowns, and climbed the hills. Not as in any ordinary festival, but as an act of remembrance, of reverence. There was no altar. There were no sacrifices. There was silence. There were tears. And there were songs. For 4 days they walked together in procession, in prayer, in remembrance. They repeated words passed from mother to daughter. She offered herself not for glory, but for love. She did not curse, but accepted. She did not flee, but walked up the mountain with faith in her eyes. They never said her name. It had become too sacred. They simply said the daughter of Jephthah. It was a lament, and at the same time a song of hope, because within that memory there was more than pain. There was purpose, a purpose greater than human understanding. Elder women told the younger ones, when Jephthah won the war, he did not celebrate with wine. He celebrated with weeping. He promised and fulfilled. She accepted and taught. And so among tears and wildflowers, the daughter of Jephthah became a symbol not only of obedience, but of surrender. not only of purity, but of living faith. A faith that defies logic, that confronts pride, that silences even the mightiest warriors. Some scribes recorded in ink what the people engraved in their hearts. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed. And she knew no man. And it was a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in a year. That custom endured through time. Even when Israel fell, even when it was taken captive, even when temples were destroyed and rebuilt, the women kept remembering. They kept climbing the hills. They kept dancing with tears in their eyes. And when Jephthah's name was mentioned in the synagogues, it was not only as judge or deliverer. It was as a father who made a vow, a father who lost, a father who fulfilled. Many rabbis debated for centuries, should he have made such a vow? Was there another way? Was it literal or symbolic? But no discussion could erase the fact. The daughter of Jephthah became eternal. Over time, the people came to understand that some stories do not exist to be explained, but to be respected. That some names shine not for their deeds, but for their sacrifice, and in the heart of the people, engraved like fire in stone. One truth remained: not every victory comes without cost. Not every vow can be forgotten, and not every sacrifice is in vain. Jephthah's daughter became like a gentle shadow that hovered over the women of Israel. She inspired young girls to be strong. She inspired fathers to weigh their words. She reminded the people that God hears and honors. On nights when the stars shone brightest over Gilead, some said they saw a figure dancing among the flowers on the hills. Others claimed to hear a soft song like that of a young girl at peace. Perhaps it was only the wind. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was her. But the final consecration was yet to come. Heaven remembered what earth could never forget. The years passed like dust swept away by the desert wind. The lands changed. So did the people. New leaders rose. New threats emerged against Israel, and the memory of the ancient judges was gradually erased from the distracted hearts of a restless nation. But not everything is forgotten. Not everything fades, because there are names that even silenced by men are sung by the heavens. In Mizpah, the people of Israel gathered to hear the words of an old prophet. His face was marked by time, his eyes steady like those of a father who knows both the path and the pain. It was Samuel, the last judge, God's chosen one. And in that sacred moment before the whole congregation, Samuel raised his voice, not to promise but to remind. But the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Bedan, Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hands of your enemies on every side. And you dwelt in safety. Silence among so many names, among so many deeds. Jephthah was mentioned, Jephthah, the son of rejection, the warrior of the vow, the father of sorrow, the one forgotten by men, but remembered by God. Samuel did not speak of the sacrifice, nor the tragedy, nor the mourning. He mentioned what mattered, the deliverance, the faithfulness, the surrender. Because before God, Jephthah was not merely the man who made a reckless vow. He was the judge who trusted, who acted, who prevailed, and who fulfilled. Samuel's words were not just historical. They were divine. They echoed through the unseen cross-generations and reached us like a divine seal, as if heaven itself declared, "I have not forgotten Jephthah." Perhaps many judged him. Perhaps others avoided his name in conversations by the well. Perhaps his daughter's name was lost to the whispers of time. But what matters is not what men remember. It is what God recognizes. And there in that prophetic speech, the Lord sealed eternity with a name the world tried to erase, Jephthah. And there is no greater honor because heaven sees the heart that no one else does. Heaven hears the promises made in silence. Heaven knows the weight of decisions that tear the soul apart. Heaven holds every tear, even the ones that never fall. Perhaps Jephthah never fully understood what he lived. Perhaps he died with his daughter's name on his lips. But somewhere between the altar and the memory, his story was written, not in ink, but in glory. And now you know it too. You heard the echo of the footsteps that climbed the mountain. You saw the eyes of a daughter who smiled even in the face of death. You felt the weight of a promise that cost more than expected. You understood that faith is not always victory with celebration, but obedience with weeping. And now you carry this memory. The story of Jephthah is not just about war or sacrifice. It is about surrender, about courage, about faith that surpasses understanding. It's about flawed men used by a perfect God. It is about vows and about love. And even if the world forgets, even if the altars fall, even if the names fade from the scrolls of time, there is a God who remembers. And when he speaks, he restores. This was the untold story of Jephthah. Now you know what he offered to God for the victory and how much it cost. But above all, now you know, heaven never forgets those who give themselves completely. Some stories end in glory, others in defeat. But there are those rare ones like Jephthah's that end in silence. A silence that speaks louder than any celebration. After the battles won, after the mourning that time could not heal, after years of leadership marked by respect and distance, the name of Jephthah still echoes among the forgotten pages of the Old Testament. A name many may avoid, a story many read with discomfort, a sacrifice few dare to understand. Yet there, between the lines and the swords, lies a truth that still pulses. Jephthah was just a man, a rejected son, an unwanted warrior, an unlikely judge, and above all, a father. Before the battlefield, he made a vow, not out of greed, not for glory, but out of desperation, a sincere yet reckless vow. An attempt to reach God's heart with something more than swords, with personal surrender, complete, painful. And God listened, and God answered. But God's answers often cross the borders of what we understand as fair or easy. Jephthah's vow, as many believe, could have been redeemed, reinterpreted, even annulled. But the judge of Israel chose to fulfill it, chose to suffer, chose to obey, because perhaps Jephthah didn't know how to bargain with heaven, but he knew how to stand before it. And the daughter, she didn't just obey. She understood. She looked into her father's eyes filled with pain and faith, and saw in them something stronger than fear. She saw purpose. She danced to welcome a victorious father. And then she wept on the mountain for not being able to dance at her own wedding. She didn't curse. She didn't run. She didn't resist. She offered herself. And there on the hills of Gilead, an eternal symbol was born, not of death, but of faithfulness, not of tragedy, but of surrender. Jephthah's daughter became the echo of a generation that understood that faith sometimes also wounds. But it is precisely this love that wounds that brings us closer to redemption. We don't know her name. We don't have her psalms. We don't have her thoughts written down. But we have her silence, her courage, her memory which crossed centuries and became tradition among the daughters of Israel. Every year for 4 days, they climbed the mountain to remember, to weep, to sing, and perhaps secretly to give thanks. Because there are vows that defy logic, that open doors in the invisible realm. Jephthah died, time passed, and Israel continued its cycle of downfall and repentance. But when Samuel raised his voice and spoke that name, Jephthah, he opened a window in heaven for the world to see. God does not forget those who seek him with all their hearts, even when it costs everything. And today you too can look at this story not through the eyes of criticism, but of understanding, not with the judgments of a modern spectator, but with the reverence of one who recognizes the beauty of obedience, even when it hurts. True faith at times wounds, cuts, strips, but it also redeems, transforms, and saves. A father's love, a warrior's vow, a daughter's courage, all intertwined in the heart of a God who sees beyond pain and rewards with eternity. Victory does not always come without pain, but before God, even the deepest suffering can reveal a faith that saves a generation. And perhaps in the end, Jephthah's daughter received much more than the earth could ever offer. Perhaps she was received by the one who knows every vow and honors every tear. If you enjoyed this story, 2 more videos with equally emotional biblical stories will appear on your screen. Click to watch them and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. May God be with you.